Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the CINECA webinar series, where Carlos Martinez Ortiz from the Netherlands eScience Center will present first software tools. My name is Marta Lloret Llenares, and I'm involved in the CINECA project on behalf of MBLBI. I will host this webinar. Before we move further, I would like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, including the question session at the end of it. And this recording will be shared on the CINECA website and the CINECA YouTube channel. We have reserved some time at the end for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please write them on the question box in the GoToWebinar application, as you can see on this slide. I would like to introduce to you the CINECA project. CINECA stands for Common Infrastructure for National Cohorts in Europe, Canada, and Africa. And it's a 4-year project funded by the European Union's Horizon 2020 research program and the Canadian Institute of Health Research. CINECA's vision is to accelerate disease research and improve health by facilitating transcontinental human data exchange. To achieve this, CINECA works on several challenges. The first of them is federated data discovery. So how, as a researcher, you can find cohort data of interest. And this could be, for example, for a specific genotype or a specific phenotype. And once you have found this data, you will need to access it. So CINECA is working on an interoperable authentication and authorization infrastructure. Once you've accessed the data and you want to ask research questions across cohorts, there's a need for a harmonized cohort level metadata. And the ultimate aim of CINECA is to enable federated data analysis for research and healthcare applications. So CINECA works with a set of demonstrators across cohorts in both research and clinical settings. On top of all these challenges, there's a fundamental need for a transnational harmonized ELSI framework to address ethical, legal, and societal issues. In addition, CINECA has an outreach and training program to increase awareness and build capacity in these areas. The webinar today is part of the event How Fair Are You?, which consists of a webinar series and hackathon to provide background knowledge and practical advice in order to facilitate the uptake of FAIR approaches. This is the third webinar of the series, and there will be 3 more webinars on how to apply these FAIR principles into specific contexts. And then at the end of April, we'll have a hackathon where we'll work on the implementation of FAIR principles in 3 parallel streams: cohort data, software, and training materials. If you want to know more about this event or register for any of the webinars or the hackathon, please visit the CINECA project website. Today's presenter, Carlos Martinez Ortiz, obtained his PhD in computer science at the University of Exeter. Afterwards, he worked on various research projects at the University of Exeter and Plymouth University, in collaboration with industrial and academic partners in a wide range of topics: automatic detection of abnormal energy consumption in buildings, video tracking of dairy cows, modeling high-performance storage systems, and segmentation of medical images. At the eScience Center, he has worked as an engineer in diverse projects in digital, humanities, and life sciences, developing expertise in natural language processing, linked open data, and software sustainability. He is also a certified software carpentry instructor and is frequently involved in organizing trainings. At this point, I will hand over to Carlos.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, as Marta already introduced me, my name is Carlos Martinez, and I work at the Netherlands eScience Center. We're based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And I'm going to talk to you about FAIR software tools. Bit of the outline of my presentation. I want to talk very little bit about the FAIR principles in general. Why is it important for researchers? Although I'm assuming that most of you are already familiar with this, and I want to touch then on how the FAIR principles apply to software, and why is this different from how the FAIR principles apply to data. And I'll give some guidance on where can you find some guidance on how the FAIR principles apply to software, and then we'll have some time for questions. So the FAIR principles, as you probably know, started from about 2016 with the publication of the FAIR Guiding Principles for Scientific Data Management and Stewardship by Mark Wilkinson, and they have been extended to other digital objects in the paper from the European Commission. There's an emphasis on the FAIR principles applying to other digital objects such as software. In 2019, a group of people, including Annalena Lamprecht, published a paper entitled Towards FAIR Principles for Research Software, in which they addressed how the FAIR principles apply to software and how the FAIR principles do not apply to software. So on the aspects that, in as much as the FAIR principles were developed mostly thinking about data, what are the differences between data and software that make the FAIR principles not entirely applicable to software. More recently, there's a working group from Research Data Alliance, Course 11 and Research Software Alliance that are working in this direction on the applicability of FAIR principles to software. And I'll touch more on that in a minute. I want to focus on a little bit as my personal opinion on the FAIR principles. I think from my point of view, the most important part of the FAIR principles applied to any digital object is the reusability aspect. Of course, this doesn't mean that the other parts are not important. Of course, you need to be able to find data or software in order to be able to reuse it. But I see this as it's almost like a path. You need first to be able to find something, you need to be able to access it. But the ultimate aim is for us to be able to reuse things. In terms of software, the aim then is to be able to reuse software as much as possible. Why would we want to reuse software? I think that's almost goes without saying, but reuse of software, it helps us to reduce the time that we spend developing software ourselves. So for example, if I want to do some data analysis in a specific way, and I don't have to write my own software for doing this data analysis, it's going to save me a lot of time in developing my own software library. So I think it almost goes without saying why reusing software is important. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, basically. Why is this important for science? Actually, this is not a new concept. Reusing of tools in science is almost as old as science itself. So I imagine most of you will be familiar with the name of Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He was the first microbiologist, I suppose. But he was also a tool maker. So Mr. van Leeuwenhoek crafted his own microscope, and he was making his own microscope, polishing the glasses, and he was making these little glass bubbles that would work as magnifying glasses. He crafted his own lenses and he polished them. He created these lenses, and he was the first to be able to observe different microscopic structures of cells and different types of microbes. And he was both doing building the tools and using the tools. So in that sense, he was a true pioneer of microscopy. nowadays, most microscopists don't need to build their own, to craft their own lenses. So nowadays, in most high schools and universities around the world, you just go to the lab and you say, I need a microscope with a 100 x power, and you can just get it off the shelf. And if you buy a microscope of 100 magnifications in Europe, or you buy a microscope with 100 magnifications somewhere in the Americas, you will get the same, a comparable level of magnification. So the tools that we use are the same in comparable in across the globe. So this is really a step, a big step forward in terms of reusing of tools, because we don't have to craft our own lenses. If we have to craft our own lenses and then use them in the lab every day, this would mean that there's like an incredible amount of variation in the observations that we do in different experiments. It almost would sound ridiculous to be building our own microscope in this day and age. But why are we doing this for software? For software, we should be able to do the same. Just pick a microscope from a shelf and use it for our analysis purposes without having to craft the lens ourselves. So lab equipment is readily available. Likewise, software should be readily available for us to use. Microscopes allow us to find an equivalent device somewhere else in the world. So with software, we should be able to do the same, to find a similar type of software to do the same analysis that somebody else has done. So the devices that we use are important for science. So in this day and age, software is the device that we are using. Software is our modern microscope. So in my point of view, from my perspective, this is the objective of the FAIR principles: to be able to have modern microscopes, to be able to have software being our modern tools and our modern microscopes. So if software is our modern microscope, what we really want to do is that if we, as a scientist, create some software to analyze some data and get some scientific results, we want another scientist in another part of the world to be able to take the same software and to do the same type of analysis that we did, and to obtain the same results that we did. So with a microscope, the equivalent would be that Mr. Leeuwenhoek took a microscope and with 100 magnifications was able to observe cells of, I don't know, yeast. In the same way, I should be able to take a microscope of 100 resolutions and be able to observe the same cells, the same yeast, and observe a similar thing to what he observed. Likewise, in our modern microscopes, we should be able to take different type of data and to be able to observe similar things. So what I'm saying here is that if a scientist develops a software tool to process a specific type of data, I don't know, the DNA sequence of yeast, and we can produce the DNA sequence of yeast. If we take a different type of microbe, a different type of life form, and we do a similar analysis using the same software, we should be able to get comparable results. I'm going to make a disclaimer here. My background is in computer science, so not in life sciences. So the software aspects are more familiar to me than the biological aspects. So if I make any mistakes of notation while talking about the biological species, and I do apologize in advance for that, because it's not my area of expertise. But the principle is what is important here, right? That we should be able to use the same software to process data in a similar way. So whether this is the DNA of a specific species or of a specific animal, we should be able to do the same with a different species or a different animal to produce equivalent results. And the important thing here is that we're reusing the same software that was used for a previous experiment. So again, going back to the FAIR principles, the real objective or the real power of this principle is in the reuse of the software and of the data of the digital objects that are we're interested in. Okay, so can we reuse the same FAIR principles for that were designed for data or that have been used for data? Can we reuse them for software? Yes, to some extent. Software is data. So when I write a program in C and I compile it, my machine compiles it to ones and zeros, and both the source code and the compiled program are information that gets written in my hard drive. So I could make this information in my hard drive findable and accessible. And in that sense, software is data. At the same time, software is a different type of, is different than data because software has an executable property. So software is executable and therefore it's different from data in the way that it can be used. So software is not, it's data, but it's not data. It's a special type of data. And especially or specifically because of this executable property of software, it becomes tricky to be able to just say, okay, I want to, okay, because of this executable property of software, it implies that it also has some dependency. So if I write software that is compiled specifically to run on a Windows machine, it will not run on a Linux machine, and the other way around. So these are things that need to be considered for specifically for software that make it add an extra layer of complication that we don't have for data, or that we don't have as much for data. So that's why the FAIR principles as they stand and as they have been applied for data are not directly applicable to software. And that's why we need to take this executable property of software into consideration when we are thinking how can it be reused and how can we apply the FAIR principles to make sure that our software is reusable. So of course, this is something that has been discussed for quite some time now. So there have been a number of workshops and previous efforts and previous discussions surrounding the applicability of software, of FAIR principles for software. And there's several workshops and working groups working on this. So this just shows a little bit of background of things that you can dig into more into this area. And the particular effort, which is one of the most current efforts in this direction, is the FAIR for Research Software Working Group. So this is a working group brought together between the Research Software Alliance, Research Data Alliance, and the Force11 initiative. So basically, it's an RDA group certified or in joint partnership with Force11 and RISA. And basically, it's a working group that has the mandate to look into the development of FAIR principles that are applicable to software. So if you want to learn more about this working group, I'm leaving these links here. So there's the link to the working group itself and some reading materials and the engagement channels. So this is a group that is currently active in defining the similarities of research software with data and the differences between research software and data, and the specific points in which the FAIR principles need to be adapted to be applicable to software. So I really encourage you to read on a little bit on this topic and to engage with this working group. So the working group is open. Everybody is welcome to participate, to collaborate, especially if you have an opinion or specific thoughts on what would be useful, what would be your needs for software to be reusable, and for the FAIR principles to cover these specific aspects. It would be really interesting to hear your point of view and your thoughts on this topic. And that's why this is an open working group. So I want to get to know you a little bit more, just to see who's in the audience today. So I'm going to switch to this Mentimeter. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mentimeter, but basically the idea of Mentimeter is that you can go to this website, menti.com, on your computer, on your phone, whichever device you're using, and you can type this code. It's going to ask you for a code, and then you can enter this code 6437419, and you should see the question coming up in your device. So I don't see any, so I see some answers starting to come in, and then this allows me to know who's in the audience and to hear about you and to learn a little bit about you. So I think there's about 24 participants, and I can see that we have some answers coming in. So we see people from Cyprus, welcome. From France, welcome. From the UK, and there's also people from Spain, people from Finland, South Africa, more representatives from the UK, and from Ireland, from Ghana. Nice, it's nice to see. From the Brexited UK. Okay, that's nice to hear. I didn't know that was a Brexited section of the UK and a non-Brexited section of the UK. From Germany, more from South Africa. Nice. So it's really nice to see that we have such a diverse crowd. I'm guessing that I've gone round. Oh no, maybe it's more people from Cyprus. Okay, it's really good. It's really nice to see that we have a diverse group here from different countries. Also considering time zone, it's nice to see who's in the room. So I'm going to move to my next question, just to get started a little bit. So what is your role? So what's your job description? Are you a PhD student? Are you a researcher? Are you research manager? Or researcher, PhD student, postdoc, application scientist, PhD student, staff bioinformatician, community manager, researcher. Nice, good to see. Coder. Okay, I was wondering, is there anybody who's research software engineer or software engineer? There's one coder, bioinformatician, so that's also probably a bit of coding happening. Okay, good. So it's really nice to see that so many of you are researchers. So I'm going to go to the next one. So what's your field of research? Here, if you want to be a little bit more specific, it helps me to understand what's your background and what's your interests. And yeah, it's always interesting to see what are the specific research interests of people who are working with software and who are interested in making software more fair. And bioinformatics, nice. Genomics and bioinformatics. Okay, nice. SE, I suppose it's software engineering, maybe. Bioinformatics and computer science. Bioinformatics, data management software. Bioinformatics and applied machine learning. Search clinic informatics. Biocuration. Nice. Genomics. Okay, so quite a bit of genomics. Okay, that's good to know. It's interesting. Yeah, great. So my next question is, how do you use research software? Basically, I want to know what's your relationship with research software. How much of the research software that you develop is just for yourself, or you develop software that others use, or whether you adapt some software or some small scripts for other people to use. Okay. And develop software. So let's see. I'm curious about this part to see how many people are using. Okay. Okay, so quite a few people. It seems like majority use generally available software at the moment. Yeah, that's still the majority. Yeah, okay. Okay, that's an interesting majority. Generally available software. Okay. And there's also quite a large percentage of people who use develop software for others to use, or that adapt software others build. So I wonder how much this relates. The people who are building software are then adapting software for others. Okay, this is an interesting picture. And I guess the next logical question is, what type of research software do you use? You already mentioned that it's mostly general purpose software, but I think it would be nice to have a little bit more specific information. If you think of a specific library that you're using, or a specific piece of software that you're using. Excel, okay. Depends on the task and the project, of course, yeah. R, okay. Okay, maybe it would be interesting to know, maybe with later on, if we have time to discuss this a little bit in more plenary as a discussion. If there's specific packages in R that you use, or specific tools within R that you're that are most useful within your field of research. Genomics workflows, different software, depends on the project. R, Docker, Make, standalone tools. Packages in R for analyzing sequencing data, and Galaxy workflows. Okay, that's very interesting information. command line, Python, R, and Nextflow. Okay, so it seems like R and workflows are two of the most used things that just to say, if I'm looking for trends here, I think workflows and R would be how I would summarize this. Okay, thank you. This really, really insightful, really interesting to know. Okay, so next question that I would like to know, and I'm interested to see how's the outcome of this going to look like. So from the software that you use, how many times does the research software that either that you develop or that you use, how many times do you think it gets reused? So if you write a script that you use for yourself, that would be just once. Or if it's a package that gets used over and over again, I can imagine that would get reused thousands of times. Okay, so so far it looks like software either gets reused a lot or gets used just a couple of times. That's really interesting. Almost to be expected. And I guess I would be curious to hear a little bit more about the software that gets reused just a few times. What makes it different? Why does it only get reused a few times? Or yeah, whether that is it's the normal life cycle of the software, or whether there's something preventing it from being adopted more and reused more. And also, it would be interesting to have some insight into the software that gets used hundreds or thousands of times. What makes that software special? Why it gets reused so many times? Okay, thanks everyone. This was very insightful. It's really interesting to know your thoughts and your feelings about these things. So I'm going to switch back to my presentation. And let's see. Okay. I'll share the Mentimeter results with Marta afterwards, so everybody can have them with the slides, just because I think it's really interesting. Okay, so now I've been talking about the FAIR principles for software and how can we make software reusable, and how can we, the software that we develop, how can we get it reused. And I think in theory, that's all very nice and good. Reusing software is clearly going to save us time and save us some effort, but how do I make sure that that small analysis script that I wrote, how can I make sure that it gets reused by others? How do I make sure that my software gets reused? How do I get started? So the Elixir tools platform, it's a good place to start. I think my colleague Jen is in the audience, so she might be able to answer more on that topic later on. So the Elixir tools platform has communities that, well, they develop tools that are meant for being reused, and they facilitate this reuse of tools. So if you're interested in the Elixir tool platform, maybe you can contact Jen afterwards. I believe I put her contact details in one of the later slides, if I didn't forget. But anyway, so the Elixir tool platform is a great place to start finding tools that are reusable for life sciences, that's their focus. So that's a good place to start looking for software that might already do what you need your software to do. So there's of course lots of tools. I'm not sure, maybe some of you are already familiar with the tools platform more than I am. But BioTools is, for example, the portal for discovering tools for bioinformatics. And of course, a lot of these tools are already integrating with workflows, CWL and Galaxy. So I think a few of you mentioned CWL workflows in general as something that you use for your software. So definitely the BioTools on the Elixir Tools platform is something that could be of interest to everybody. Another thing that we do, so that's I think the Elixir Tools platform can help you find software that is already developed and that you can reuse. If you're developing software yourself and you want to make sure that your software is reusable by other people, the eScience Center together with the DANS, we developed a website which provides recommendations for fair software. So these recommendations are simple recommendations that are easy to implement and that basically makes your software more findable, helps others to find and reuse your software a little bit more. So this helps your software move a little bit more in the direction of being reusable. So the recommendations are here. They're very simple: using a version control repository, having a license, registering your software in a community registry, for example, so like BioTools, enabling software citation, and using a software quality checklist. So these basic recommendations really are just meant to bring up the quality of your software so it becomes more usable by other people. So if you want to find out more, just visit this website. It has some useful practical information. These recommendations of the Fair Software website are a little bit high-level recommendations that tell you, yes, add a license, or yes, use version control. But sometimes you need a little bit more in-depth knowledge of practical point for getting started. So yes, okay, I want to use version control, but which version control system should I use and what commands exactly do I need to type? And that's where there's several guides. So the eScience Center, we have our eScience guide. The Elixir Tools platform also has a software best practices guide. And there's also the Turing way and the 4 OSS lessons. So that's open source software recommendations. So it is the 4 recommendations for open source software. It's a software carpentry lesson that also teaches you the basics of how can you start making your open source software more, increase the quality of your open source software. And basically all of these resources are really basic hands-on ways of what commands do you need to start typing in order to develop better software. So these all are step-by-step guides that help you get started. So I recommend you looking at them, and they're useful resources for getting started. So another thing is that's all the guides are practical steps on how to get started with your coding and making your coding better. But there's also the more managing side of your software. So you should start also when you're developing software, you should try to make a plan for how are you going to develop your software and make it more reusable. So in the same way that when you're doing data collection, you need to know the practicals of how to collect your data, and you need to have a data management plan to tell you, okay, I'm going to collect this type of data, save it in this format, and to guide your data management process. In the same way, you should try to have a software management plan to help you think about how you're going to manage your software throughout the life cycle of your project. So software, what are software management plans? Basically, software management plan is a guide to help you develop your software and help you think about how you're going to develop your software and how you're going to engage with other users, potential users of your software, to get it to take up your software, and it helps you. So having a software management plans also usually have you provide you guidance on where can you start taking the small actions that help you improve the quality of your software. So, for example, using one of the guides that I mentioned before. So, software management plans are a good place for thinking about planning ahead. How can I make my software more fair or better in general? So again, Elixir has some guidelines on using software management plans. So they're simple awareness tools, and they can help you assign responsibilities in your software project. So Elixir already has some very good guidance on software management plans. The Software Sustainability Institute also has a series of blog posts and resources online that help you pick a good software management plan and to design the suitable software management plan for your project. The eSign Center, we also have our Software Sustainability Protocol, different name, same principle. The idea of this software sustainability protocol is exactly the same, that you should plan ahead of time how are you going to manage your software for it to be sustainable in the long term. Okay. These are some tools that could help you. Sorry. Just a final thought on to wrap up with software management plan. So this is all plans for developing your software in such a way that you can make it more fair, and so that the software that you're developing is more reusable in the long term. Okay. Now I'm going to switch a little bit context. So that's nice if you're if you're writing your own software, but sometimes if you're not writing your own software and you just want to use tools that help you make your data, share your data in a more fair way. So what you're looking for is not how to make your software fair, but software that can facilitate you complying with the FAIR principles. These three resources, the data verifier, fair data point, and nano publication, are three tools developed by different teams that can help you to publish your data in compliance with the FAIR principles. So to make your data findable and accessible, to have the correct metadata to make it interoperable, and with the aim of making your data reusable. So I just wanted to have these tools here to point you in the right direction. If that's what you're after, if you want to say, okay, I don't want to change the way that my software, I'm not developing any software, I just want some tools that can help me share my data in a fair way, I'll point you to these tools. And then you can, that's a good starting point for just sharing your data in a fair way. So that's all I had to say. If you please feel free to get in touch if there's any questions after this presentation. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm always more than happy to talk. And I think now we can move to the questions part, Marta?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carlos, for the talk. So yes, if you have any questions, please write them in that question box, or any comments about some of the Mentimeter questions that we have, for example, you can write them in those questions and we'll take them to Carlos. I have a question, Carlos. Why do you think that what is stopping people from making fair software?
Okay, so I think to a large extent is that a lot of the time when we develop software, we have a single goal in mind, and it's the one project that I'm working on. And if you develop software with just thinking about the project that you have in front of you, it's very difficult for someone else to then use that software for a different purpose. So it takes a lot of effort to design your software in a way that is flexible enough for other people to reuse it. And I think obviously not everybody is trained as a software engineer, and these software engineering practices of making your software modular and making it flexible so other people can reuse it, then that makes it difficult for not following these software engineering practices makes it difficult for other people to reuse your software. That's why I think it's important to have some training and to have some to learn some good practices on how can you develop your software with others in mind. So you should have in mind not only the project that you're working on, but the potential impact that your software has. So if you are developing a package that does I don't know, that analyzes genomic sequence, you could say, okay, I'm analyzing the genomic sequence of tomatoes, but can this be also used to analyze the genomic sequence of broccoli? And then I should write my software in such a way that I can easily, even though my project is about tomatoes, that somebody else could switch it to apply it to broccoli, and without it taking too much effort. I think that's the main challenge, that people don't have this training, and I think that's one of the main hurdles. And I think that's one of the things that Elixir is putting a lot of effort actually into providing trainings for people to learn these basic practices, these good practices for software development.
Okay, yeah, we received a comment when we were talking about this, saying probably because it requires more time. I guess you now said that if you have this training, you will do that with less effort. Do you think it will also, I mean, how much more time will it require if you do it properly?
It does take more time. Doing things properly always takes more time. I think that's true, and I think that we are if we there's always pressure to publish that paper and get it out of the door and get results published as quickly as possible, then we're always under pressure, and then we're never going to do clean our data or to clean our software for others to reuse. And I think that's an issue in the academic system as a whole, that this publish or perish culture is actually counterproductive. And I think it's really valuable to say, yes, it's going to take me more time to make my software properly, but this is in the long run going to save time for someone else. And I think that's an important cultural change that we need to make. We need to say, okay, I'm doing this. Maybe it will even help me in the future, but it will also help some other people in the future. So I'm going to make it because it's the right thing to do. It's the right way to develop software, and that's maybe a little bit idealistic. I'm completely aware, but I think that's what we as researchers should aim for, to do things properly.
Thank you, Carlos. So we have a couple more questions coming. Is the software management plan a requirement or a really good recommendation to follow for making software fair?
It depends. It's at the moment, it's just a recommendation. But in the same way as data management plans were a recommendation and a good idea 10 years ago, data management plans nowadays, I think even in most European projects, are a requirement, and you have to have a data management plan. So I can imagine that in the future, as software gains more importance in the research landscape, that other funding agencies will make them a requirement. And even in the Netherlands, the Dutch research organization, NVO, they already require software for some projects within some goals. And as a pilot, they require projects that develop software to have a software management plan. That's something new in NVO. So it's an isolated case, but I think this is a tendency, and in the future I can see that more people will take this more seriously.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Another question is, how does the application of FAIR principles to software development differ from that used when building workflows encompassing several different types of software?
Okay, that's a good question. I don't think that it will differ that much, because when you're building a workflow, you want to make sure that all the steps in your workflow are properly documented and are reusable as much as possible. And I think that for software, for FAIR software, it's a similar story, right? That you want to make sure that all your software is properly documented and it's reusable by others. So at the very abstract level, I think the aim is the same. So if we put the emphasis on the reusability, the FAIR principles for software will aim at software being reusable, and developing a workflow in following the best guidance on workflow development. That's the same objective, that you can reuse your whole workflow and the different workflow steps. So I think at a high level and at a little bit of an abstract level, they have the same aim in mind, right? The aim is for a reusability of what you have developed.
Yeah, thank you. So another question is, how can standards like GA4GH or ISO help make software, for example, web services, more interoperable?
Okay, I'm not familiar with these. The first one that you mentioned, GA4GH.
Yes.
That's a very good question. So I'm not familiar with this specific standard, but as in general, I think that using standard formats or standard protocols for communication between different pieces of software it helps really the interoperability. it's at the basis of interoperability of different pieces of software, right? So if I have a piece of software that produces a specific type of file that only my software is able to read, then it's very difficult to interoperate. Okay, so I just thinking about that. For example, if you have a specific type of document, for example, if you have a Word document, but that it can be read also in OpenOffice, then that means that you can interoperate between using Word and using OpenOffice. But if you have a proprietary type of file, I don't know, whatever file format they use for Illustrator, then that type of file, you can only use it in Illustrator. So if you stick to standards, if you use standard formats, that will help the interoperability of your software between different pieces of software. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
I guess it does. The example was very, very clear, I think, but that was a question from Mamana. So Mamana, feel free to add anything if you'd like. Otherwise, we don't have any more questions. So, and we are close to the hours. As I said, this is a webinar series on the FAIR principles. So the next 2 webinars are going to be one next week on Thursday, the 4th of March, about practically FAIR. So with examples on how to apply these FAIR principles to some data. And then we'll have one on how to make training FAIR on Thursday, the 18th of March. So if you want to know more about those, again, you can visit the CINECA project website and you can register for them there. I would like to thank all the attendees for joining us today, and thank you very much, Carlos, for this insightful presentation and answers to the questions.
No, thank you, Marta. It's been a pleasure. Please feel free to contact me afterwards if you have any further questions.